Welcome back to Make Me Good. I'm your host, David Karli. Today's show is going to focus on stem cells, namely a very controversial new law here in the state of Florida, which will change what we're able to do as clinicians offering cell therapeutics to patients. I'm joined by Andrew Ittleman. Andrew is an authority, a legal authority in this space. He's been working with cell therapeutics, advising doctors like me and other thought leaders on what we can and can't do, how to protect ourselves from a liability standpoint, but also how to protect our patients. Andrew is a founding partner at First Ittleman, David, and Joseph right here in Miami, and a former University of Miami Law School grad. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we've seen each other at conferences and so forth, and I reached out to you a little while ago as, like every physician in the state of Florida, wondering what the heck is this thing and where did it come from and what do we do about it? So Andrew, I wanted to start with kind of getting your perspectives of when you found out about this law as someone who's been in the trenches, representing docs, doing expert witness work in cell therapies and the regulatory aspects. What was your knee-jerk reaction? What did you originally think?
Welcome to Florida.
Welcome to the wild, wild west on the east.
Yep. Yeah. It's, The law, I like to think, it's unburdened by what has been.
Yeah.
We have about, 20 some odd years of history for these types of products. And there's lots of details to it, going in any number of different directions.
Yeah.
And we can look back at that history and we can learn from it as far as, what's safe and what's not, and what types of products are good and validated at this point and which aren't.
Yeah.
And this new law kind of takes all of that and throws it out the window.
Right.
And so we're in sort of a brave new world where lots of products, where the FDA has been saying over and over again for years, you can't do that in the United States. The state of Florida says, to hell with that. We're going forward the way that we want to.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to have a conflict between state and federal law, and how that plays out is anybody's guess.
And we're going to dig into that. But before we do, for people who may not know, let's kind of go through the basics of the law, what it says, and structurally help people to understand what it is we're dealing with. And then we're going to dig into all kinds of aspects of it. So first and foremost, what does the law foundationally say?
So the law allows for the distribution and the use in Florida of what the law calls stem cell products. And generally speaking, what these stem cell products are injectable fluids that are manufactured by a centralized facility, and they're distributed to doctors. And the products themselves are derived from birth tissue waste. So placental tissue and amniotic fluid and things like that. Once it's donated by a hospital, a company is going to come in and purchase that waste from the hospital. They'll process that tissue. They'll clean it. They'll put it in a bottle. They'll ship it to a doctor frozen, and then the doctor will use it as an injectable for patients. And the law makes clear, the Florida law does anyway, that it's limited to MDs, meaning medical doctors, not chiropractors or naturopaths. And the uses are limited to orthopedics and pain management and wound care.
Right.
And so, if you have some type of a sports injury, for instance, one of your options now in Florida, and we'll put that big asterisk there, but one of your options now here is to get an injection with one of these so-called stem cell products. The law also requires that prior to the time that the product is shipped to the doctor, the manufacturer needs to confirm that it has some type of viability, some viable cells in there.
Meaning they're alive. Viability basically means they're alive.
Correct. And, the manufacturer of the product is going to have to get validated by third-party institutions that they're doing this the right way, not according to any laws, but according to those institutions.
Yep.
And so these manufacturers will be able to get different types of certifications from these third-party organizations to say, we're doing this the right way.
Now, we'll get more into the nuts and bolts of the law, but I want to focus a little bit on why the law is so controversial. Historically, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA's position on cell therapies has been X, and this law says Y. Let's talk about X. What is the Food and Drug Administration's positions been on use of living cells, including stem cells, up to this point?
Sure. So the FDA's rules really, they break the world into halves.
Yeah.
On the one side, you have what's called autologous tissue, right? Autologous means that the tissue is taken from the patient and put back into the patient, typically in the same surgical environment, in a closed setting. These products, though, are allogeneic, meaning it's going from a donor to a patient. And for those products over the years, and it's written right in the regulations, that if this allogeneic product is dependent upon the metabolic activity of cells to achieve its intended function, that product needs to be approved by FDA before it can be distributed and used by doctors. And so it's those types of products, it's the allogeneic cellular products that are now authorized for use in the state of Florida by the Florida legislature.
Okay. So the FDA historically said you can take your own cells, you can take them out, and we won't get into all the specifics of the Code of Federal Regulation and all the guidelines, but you can take your own cells, you can concentrate them, and immediately put them back into yourself.
Right.
That is an autologous type of point-of-care therapy, and the FDA said that was okay. That's part of the practice of medicine.
Right.
They said anything else, a donor cells, a cell from another person, birthing tissue, placenta, et cetera, anything other than your own that's manipulated is not okay for routine use, but requires an FDA approval process. Correct?
And specifically, and there's allogeneic tissue that can be used. For instance, when the tissue is used for something that it was doing organically, for instance, amniotic membrane as a wound covering.
Yeah.
But when the cellular material from these products becomes relevant, FDA says, well, now all of a sudden there's a communicable disease risk that we need to monitor for. And so when FDA wrote these regulations in the beginning, it did so because it has the authority to regulate drugs, and it also has the authority to prevent the spread of communicable diseases. And it used those two authorities to make these rules. And so that's what the FDA's rules are designed for. State of Florida, sort of disregards all of that. And now these allogeneic cellular products are fair to be used in Florida.
Yeah, and people listening, everyone's hearing about baby cells and stem cells, and you can't go anywhere on social media without getting bombarded by companies, particularly offshore companies that are offering this to patients. But again, what made the law so controversial is it disregarded the FDA's position.
Yes.
And it created its own. Now, one of the things I've been dying to ask you, and I want people to understand, is how the exact same products exist when the federal viewpoint on that product is one thing, and a state's viewpoint on it is totally another thing, and they're completely in opposition to each other? How legally can that happen, and who actually takes precedence?
Right. So we can look at the history of cannabis in the United States as a good example.
Yeah.
Right. And California was the first they actually passed the constitutional amendment in 1996. Colorado came in many years later. You have many states now that have legalized cannabis, and still under federal law, it's a Schedule I drug, and it's technically completely off limits. But you have these different laws that have been butting heads for a long time. And in the beginning of that history in California and elsewhere, it was messy. And there were many occasions when the federal government came in and cracked down on cannabis operations in the United States, either criminally or by seizing assets. And frankly, it's still not all that clean, close to 30 years later. Today, cannabis operations still have difficulty opening and maintaining bank accounts. And theoretically, for instance, if the Trump administration really wanted to crack down on cannabis, in spite of the laws in the United States that say you can do it, he could. And it could get very ugly very quickly. And so right now, the big question, at least for me, is what are the feds going to do? When it's open season in Florida for these types of products that have really been off limits for doctors for the last 20 years, are the feds, whether in this administration or some administration down the road, going to allow it? Or are they going to say this is a public safety risk and it has the risk of spreading across state lines, and it has the risk of sort of making the FDA look silly? And if so, they could crack down on it, and it could get ugly. But we're so early on in the lifespan of this that nobody knows at this point.
Okay, so again, let's review so I want people to understand exactly what it is we're talking about. So a law just passed a week or two ago in Florida, which states that previously unapproved live living stem cell products from another person are now able to be offered to patients legally in the state of Florida under certain guidances, which you outlined a little bit before. But in the rest of the country, those same cells are not compliant, not legal.
Right.
So here they are. The rest of the country, they are not.
There's actually another law in Utah.
In Utah, right.
And that's been on the books for about a year. We still don't have really good data about how successful it's been or not. So we're the second state technically, but I think we'll all agree that as far as being flashy and whatnot, that Florida is going to be on another level than Utah. Patient demand here is probably going to be much higher than it will be there as well.
Well, and a lot of the offshore models where people are seeking these types of treatments out because there's no FDA to oversee and regulate those products in other countries are very close to Florida.
Right.
So I wonder, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering, and I don't want to speculate, I don't want to put you in a position to speculate, but could this be a medical tourism financially driven law to keep those people that Florida is losing to other countries here? And perhaps if there's some merit to it, to say, well, we're losing them and we don't know what they're getting, so let's keep them here. At least we can kind of oversee it and make sure it's a little bit of a safer play. Is that possible?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there could be benevolence here. It's not all bad.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to say that it's all bad, and I appreciate the intent of expanding access to products. My whole point is that if we look at the history, I would want to tap on the brakes a little bit here before we completely open the door to all of that. But I agree with you.
You mentioned risk, and I want to talk a little bit about the FDA's purpose and why they do what they do. The FDA and biotech in my world and the world you play as well is kind of the enemy, right? We're constantly battling them. They slow us down. They prevent us from doing things. They prevent us from innovating. There's also a very important role that the FDA plays, and they've gotten a bad rap post-COVID, right? And the administration change, and we'll talk about the administration change, but tell people a little bit about the good part of the FDA, why it exists, and why it is important for our country in terms of public safety.
Sure. FDA regulates close to a third of the economy, the U.S. economy. All the drugs, medical devices, biologics, much of the food supply, on and on. Imports, exports, and for the most part, the integrity of our food and drug supply in the United States, it's the envy of the world. But FDA will always be in a thankless position here, right? If they allow things on the market too quickly, people get hurt. If they are too slow or too deliberate in the way that they review things, the products don't get out onto the market fast enough, and people are deprived of these things. It can certainly be bureaucratic, but I think it is by design, and it's deliberate also by design. But they're effectively in the United States doing extremely important work. This is one place though where I think, for the most part, people would like things to move a little bit faster, and I think you see that in this Florida statute.
Well, the FDA with the administration change at the White House also had a change in leadership.
Yes.
From Peter Marks to
McCarty.
Yes. So you're McCarty. You're coming into a new role as the head of the FDA, and you see Florida doing this. And again, I don't expect you to predict what he's going to do, but the culture of the administration and its change, it also changed a little bit. What do you think the FDA, are they going to sit and watch this as a kind of a social experiment? Are they upset that someone went above and beyond them? Where do you think their heads are at when it comes to viewing what Florida is doing independent of their jurisdiction?
Right. So the FDA is part of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah.
And the head of the Department of Health and Human Services now is Kennedy. Right. And so Kennedy has been very vocal from even before the time that he was chosen for this job, that he wanted to see things, including stem cells, get out onto the market faster. A lot of people, depending on your perspective, universities and scientists say, well, that creates a patient safety risk. But other folks say, hey, this can't happen fast enough. And so I guess your perspective is going to drive your perspective of him.
Sure.
And so I think that what you said about allowing this to become a social experiment, at least during this administration, that is probably a fair take, and it very well may go that way. But theoretically, if this thing gets out ahead of itself, or if there are patient injuries, things like that, that's when you might see a crackdown. And when that happens, nobody knows. Hopefully it doesn't. But it can, and it has in the past.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that because it's an important point for people to know. Someone who's watching, who's interested in stem cells, understands, all right, now I have choice. And it kind of comes down to choice. Now, again, the FDA's position is to protect the public safety. If they see risk, then they require a company interested in a stem cell model using someone else's cells to go through certain steps to prove safety. That's an FDA approval process, traditional one. The products that are going to be offered in the United States, the law says, don't need to be FDA approved. And as we know, don't have the safety data that would normally be expected for that product to be able to be offered to patients. So I want to talk about the potential safety risks here that people need to be aware of if they're going to explore unapproved cell therapies. What do they need to know?
Well, I think first of all, they should understand that there are plenty of doctors in Florida offer the autologous variety of cellular therapies.
Including this one.
I mean, PRP is well accepted at this point. Autologous bone marrow, which is minimally manipulated and administered to you in the same day, that's well accepted. It's obviously a little bit more of a difficult experience for the patient because they either need to have their blood drawn or they need to have bone marrow removed from their hip. But those processes and the products are well understood. They're widely available. They're not controversial, and there's plenty of doctors offering them. As far as these new products are concerned, it's hard to say what you're going to get. And anybody who tells you differently may not necessarily know what they're talking about. The problem for the products is that number one, as you mentioned, the evidence isn't necessarily there that they work, and frankly, the evidence isn't even there that these are stem cell products. And I think that's something that people really need to understand, because stem cells have a definition, right? Stem cells, by definition, and the way that scientists and doctors understand them, is that they can grow. And you could put them in culture and they will expand and they can potentially grow new tissue in your body. That's a stem cell. Now, the products that we're talking about today, once they are removed from the hospital and they're processed into a drug and they are shipped to the doctor and there's multiple temperature changes, number one, the whether they are going to be viable when they reach the doctor's office is a question. And number two, there's many studies out there that the cells that are in these products aren't necessarily stem cells in the first place. There's cellular material in them. Sometimes it's dead. To the extent that they're live, you can't necessarily grow them. They're not really viable as that term is used. Right. And so, you may get some benefit from them, but you could get that same benefit from Hyalgin. It may just be a placebo effect because you're putting anything into your injured knee. And so, the data for those types of products, it's really not all there the way that it is for for instance, autologous bone marrow and PRP and things of that nature.
Right. Well, those of us, and you operate in the same circles that I do, who've been researching and developing autologous or cells from the patient used to treat the same patient. We care a lot about that space. A lot of people have put a lot of time and effort over the last 20 years to validate that model is effective. But one of the interesting things I found about this law is a point that you mentioned. We have to go get them, we have to process them, we have to put them back in. There's a natural appeal, if you talk about the law of supply and demand, to take those magical baby cells off the shelf, draw them up into a syringe. The patient doesn't have to get but one little needle into wherever they're going and put them in there, and voila, you're going to be cured. And we see lots of cure truth claims and all those kinds of things out there that are unsubstantiated, as we know. But talk for a minute about people in the autologous space, like myself, who've worked very hard trying to compete. We've talked a little bit about this with celebrity endorsement and influencer endorsement and a lot of hype and sensationalism about these baby cells without the actual data to support those claims. What do consumers need to know?
I think that it's a matter of being skeptical. Just based on the history of these products, in many instances, they just haven't been what they claim to be. And I don't mean to say that they're dangerous per se, right? I mean, there have been a few instances where bad batches of these types of products have gotten out onto the market. For instance, the Livion case. But the more prominent example would be the Stem Cell Institute of America, right? Which just had to pay a $5 million judgment to the Georgia Attorney General's office and the FTC because they were selling stem cell products. They were making all sorts of claims about these products. And at the end of the day, they really didn't work. And so, there was a highly publicized judgment, and it was just very recent. Basically the punchline of the story was that, again, these products weren't what they say they are. And so, to the extent that you are venturing out to get yourself treatment now with one of these products, you've seen an advertisement in Florida, something along those lines. Number one, I think you should proceed with some skepticism. I think that's healthy. And I think you should approach any medical procedure that way. But look at the bona fides. Look at the bona fides of the doctor that you're working with. Is this someone who has a good reputation? Is there negative feedback of them online? Because theoretically, there's negative feedback on him about some completely unrelated procedure, but that may be relevant to the extent to which he has credibility with you.
Sure.
And you can trust what he's going to say about this thing, fixing your injury.
Yeah. I
would also say that if it's presented to you in a manner that's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true, right? If any doctor is going to tell you this thing is completely safe and it's 100% effective and you're going to be back on your feet tomorrow, go the other direction, because even the best products in the world don't work like that.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the issues with this law is that it's allowing these products to get into the hands of so many more doctors. And these doctors don't necessarily need to get the training the way that you have and many other stem cell doctors have over the years. And theoretically, the doctors aren't going to be using image guidance to make sure that the cells get to the right place.
Sure.
They may just go up to you with a needle and stick it in your knee and think that it's going to work, but that's not how it works. And that's not, how I've seen it work over the years.
Yeah.
And so, there's more to it than just the stem cells. It's the doctor behind the stem cells. It's the manufacturer supplying the doctor. You'll see manufacturers popping up overnight. Why? Because the barrier to entry to being a stem cell company now is so low. Really, all that you need is a contract with a hospital to buy their birth tissue waste, and I could have Andrew's stem cell company open tomorrow. Frankly, I can have another company just white labeling it for me and putting the Andrews stem cells on the bottle. And there's really nobody who is, paying attention to the details the way that they need to.
Now let's stay on there for a minute, because there is a little bit of oversight built into the law.
Sure.
And one of the things that it said, well, two things that it says. One, the company that's delivering these products have to be registered with the FDA. Now, that is related to manufacturing of the product, which you can educate people. The second is that they have to be a member of one of 4 organizations. And I'll let you tell listeners what the role of those organizations is. First, these companies that are offering these products have to be registered with the FDA. What does that mean?
So being registered with the FDA and having an FDA approved product are two very different things, right? So under the law, if you're handling human tissue, in this instance, these birth tissue products, you need to register with FDA. And basically all that means is that you're putting yourself on the map. FDA is going to know who you are and where you are, and if they want to inspect you, they can inspect you. It doesn't mean they have inspected you. It doesn't mean you've passed an inspection if they have inspected you, and it doesn't mean that the product that you make has been approved for any indication in the United States. But it's some level of, I guess, authority that's overlooking the manufacturers in this instance. And, to the extent that there's a problem, FDA would know where it came from, and FDA could come in and crack down on that. And so, as far as the organizations are concerned, basically the law, the new Florida law, wants these manufacturers to have some type of stamp of approval. Again, not necessarily for the products, the way that you would have an FDA approved drug, but you would have some organization, one of these third-party nonprofits, to come in, look at your manufacturing, and basically confirm that you're doing things the right way.
So their role isn't to say that the product is good, bad, or indifferent. Their role is to say the manufacturer of the product meets standards.
Yes.
And that's a very important point for people to understand. They're not saying this is good, this is bad, this is safe. They're saying the way you make it isn't likely to contaminate a sample to hurt someone from the manufacturing side.
Right. You're doing things, generally speaking, the right way. Your manufacturing is where it needs to be, according to us, as the non-party, the third-party nonprofit organization, that's providing you with this certification.
Right. Okay. So let's role play for a second. I'm a patient and you're the doctor, okay? And I'm interested. I have a knee arthritis. Oh, and before we do that, there are 3 things that these cells can be used for: orthopedic applications, wound care, and pain management.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm coming to you as a patient. I have a knee arthritis. And doctor, I heard about this new stem cell law, and I heard my favorite celebrity influencer say that baby cells are better than my own, and I'm 65 years old, and they told me I don't have any good stem cells anymore. I think I want those baby cells. What should the consumer hear back from a legal standpoint that you think would be a fair way to address that question?
Well, I think that...
And I want you to practice medicine, of course.
Yeah, I would say that's your job a lot better than it is my job.
From the legal perspective, meeting the requirements of the law, what does the doctor have to say to meet the requirements of the law?
Well, the doctor should be providing the patient with an informed consent. And there's some minimum thresholds that we have in the new law requiring basically the doctor to tell the patient that the product's not FDA approved. And when the doctor receives the product from the manufacturer, the product needs to come with some type of a certification that there's validation, that there's viability as far as these cells are concerned. But there's no specific viability level, and again, what exactly they're viable with, is really up in the air as far as I'm concerned. Because again, the law doesn't require stem cells the way that doctors and scientists understand that to be. The law is basically just using stem cells as a term to describe any number of different cells, and regardless of how viable they are. But anyway, you'll receive an informed consent from the doctor, or you should anyway. And really, any informed consent should be explaining, and especially in this instance, Product's not FDA approved. You should be understanding what the alternatives are. There should be an explanation of the risks associated with the procedure, what the expected benefits might be, et cetera. And so, but going back to your question, I'm 65 and I don't trust my own cells, and I'd rather get the baby cells. I haven't really seen great data on that as far as the difference for the 65-year-old between the autologous and the allogeneic. But I think that the doctor would owe the patient a fair explanation at that point, based on what the doctor understands. Yeah. But that information doesn't exist.
Right.
In the ether. That's something on the doctor, that it's something that he should be researching. Yep. And that's a question he should be prepared to answer to the extent that it comes in. And if he's going to be providing his patient with an honest take in response to that question, hopefully he's looked it up, and hopefully he's looked at some of the studies that are out there.
I came to you a few weeks ago as this was looming, wanting to help me understand where I should be as a provider on this. And we'll talk about some good that could potentially come out of it. But one of my questions was, with regards to informed consent and assessing risk and expressing that risk to the patient, the answer here is, we don't know.
Yeah.
And where does that put the doctor and the patient in terms of liability when I can't tell the patient what the risk is because there's no data to allow me to actually assess it as their clinician? And that's really the controversy here.
Sure.
Is I can't assure your safety based on any precedent for products that haven't gone through an approval process and have little to no data that we can fall back on. How do I handle that as a clinician?
I mean, that's kind of the boogeyman here, right? Yeah. I mean, you don't have the same level of protection under the law administering this unapproved product as you would administering an approved product to a patient. And to the extent that it's tainted or there's some type of a problem with it, along the lines of what we saw with Livion, that case that I mentioned earlier, there's going to be exposure. And, the question for, really any medical malpractice case is, did you fall beneath the standard of care?
Right.
And that's something here that is going to need to be resolved. And unfortunately, that's something that plays out in courts when people get hurt. Yeah. That's how the standard of care is developed.
Yeah.
Now, we're also waiting for rules from the Department of Health and the Florida Medical Board to sort of, formalize all of this and to crystallize, what these standards are going to be. But we don't have that yet. And they have the authority in the statute to write those rules. But the law was just passed 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So we don't have that yet.
Right.
And for now, I think you need to proceed carefully. And I think you need to really, as a doctor, be questioning everything.
Yeah.
I would say, especially if you are, if a sales rep shows up at your clinic and she's from a company that you've never heard of before, saying, we've got the latest and greatest stem cells, I would be doing my research on it. And I might want to look at the product itself when it comes in, just to confirm that it is what they say it is. Not every doctor is going to have the equipment to be able to do that. But, at that point, I would say maybe go with a manufacturer that's a little bit better established. Yeah. Someone who's got a little bit more credibility behind their name.
Which is challenging because it puts the burden on the physician to try to figure that out, which is not easy to do. All right, let's role play again. I'm a patient who had one of these new cell therapies and had a bad outcome. I had an infection or a serious event, or I ended up in the hospital, or I was harmed in some way. And as the doctor who treated that patient with a product that I couldn't assess risk, I'm coming to you and going, Andrew, what do I do? And I want you to represent me. How are you going to view that case, right? How are you going to think about that case? And then in terms of federal and state law and wrestling your way through that process, what would happen there?
Well, I would say that the more likely case is going to be products that don't work, where the doctor told the patient that it was going to work, and there's some type of unfair trade practices allegation in the lawsuit, and those often come up as class action cases, and you see that kind of thing all the time. But to the extent that somebody gets hurt, hopefully there's insurance. Hopefully the insurance covered this type of risk. Hopefully there wasn't an exclusion in the insurance for cell products. And I think that's something that doctors should be looking at as well when they go into. So I'm glad you asked that question. Look at your insurance policy. And if it's vague, talk to your broker. Say, am I going to be covered for this in the event of a bad outcome? I think that's an important action item for doctors to take, to the extent that they have insurance. But beyond that, how am I going to defend it? I mean, how I'm going to defend it is going to be based on a million different circumstances. I mean, theoretically, the doctor's not going to want to have his name in bright lights in that litigation, and we just make it go away as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But there will be some creative defenses that lawyers will come up with. There's a lot of good trial lawyers in the state of Florida on both sides, plaintiff and defense.
Yeah.
And that's the way that these things develop. The law sort of matures with time as judges write opinion and clarify what these kinds of standards are.
In that situation, what legal authority would ultimately decide, and maybe you can't answer this question, the outcome of the case? The federal one or the state one?
The state one.
The state one.
Yeah.
So in this case, a lawsuit filed in the state of Florida would follow the confines of the Florida law, even though the federal law says something different.
Yes.
That's how it would shake down.
Yes.
So there is at least some liability protection built in by that.
Yes, there is some liability protection built in there. You're right.
Now, could the plaintiff say, screw Florida, I'm going to the Supreme Court?
Well, that it would have to go up through the Florida procedure because unfortunately the federal law, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, doesn't give you what's called a private cause of action. You can't sue a doctor for having violated the federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act or its regulations. It would have to travel under the Florida law.
I think this is important for potential patients to hear because, God forbid, something bad happens. You need to know that the way in which the case would be viewed would be based on the Florida law, which says that these things are okay.
Sure.
Yeah. And it says that with due informed consent, with proper informed consent and checking all the boxes, it was perfectly legal.
Sure.
So if you are a patient that has an adverse outcome, there isn't perfect protection built into this law.
I think that's a really good point. I think there's ways for plaintiffs' lawyers to carve their way through it. And there's other laws that are on the books in Florida that they can rely on. But I think you're right that, to the extent that I'm a doctor and I buy one of these stem cell products and it either doesn't work or it hurts somebody, I am going to have at least that basic layer of protection that's provided by the new statute.
Interesting. All right, let's change gears for a second because something I've had to wrestle with over many years being in this field. The U.S. has been criticized as falling behind the rest of the world in stem cell therapeutics because of the FDA and the limitations imposed on doctors like me by the FDA. My position has always been, well, if there are rules, then we got to follow those rules and let's innovate within the rules. This changes that game entirely. You meet with thought leaders. You were just at a conference where you lectured and taught us the legal ramifications of all of this stuff. Do you think that perspective that the U.S. is behind the rest of the world is fair based on what you see and hear in your travels and meeting with doctors?
It's hard to say. I mean, the grass is always greener on the other side. But for me, first and foremost, for normal indications, orthopedics and things like that, the things that the Florida statute covers, pain management, wound protection, orthopedics, et cetera. If I want to get taken care of, I want to get taken care of in the United States, period. Now, with that said, there are lots of indications where there's no alternatives in the United States. There's no approved drugs, but I can get easier access to treatment with products that have some level of data behind them, and I can go abroad for that. I can go to China, I can go to the Caribbean, et cetera. And so, if I'm in a really tough spot, I have a serious indication, I might consider it at that point. And then there are other indications where, patients want to go and get a little bit more exotic treatments as well, and they'll take the medical tourism route, and that's certainly fine. But it's just not necessarily apples to apples. It's not an apples to apples comparison. And, the patient safety standards and the risks that they're willing to take abroad, they just have a different kind of mindset, and they're willing to take greater chances. But the law that we have here, for the most part, it's very, it's American. It's deliberate, and it's deliberate by design. And we've seen plenty of instances where FDA has been slow to approve products, knowing that patients are really suffering, if not dying from them. But they still, they don't, FDA doesn't regulate a product based on one patient. They regulate it based on the entire society and how that approval is going to impact the whole society. And unless they have that full confidence that it's going to be safe and effective, they're not going to approve it. And we saw that a couple of years ago with the Alzheimer's drug that was approved and all of the chaos that stemmed from that. It was a very aggressive approval. There was lots of negative feedback about it. It got very political. And then you have bureaucrats within the FDA having national focus, national spotlight on them. They don't like that. And so I'm not crazy about comparing what we have here to what they have abroad, simply because, the way that we approach things and the standards and the goals that we have, particularly within FDA, are sort of different than what they have over there.
As I'm listening to you, I actually had never thought about this before it popped into my head. Have you seen or come across cases where someone went abroad and had a serious adverse event or a bad outcome, then came back to the U.S. seeking legal counsel when they were treated in another country? Have you run into that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't.
How's that handled?
I haven't taken that kind of case. I mean, but I've seen lawsuits filed, and it can be difficult. I mean, theoretically, you're going to go to the Bahamas or wherever else it is, and you're going to sign a document saying that everything that happens here is governed by Bahamian law. Or you go to Turkey and it's governed by Turkish law, et cetera. And so if you try to bring that claim in the United States, it's going to be really difficult. You'll get potentially kicked out of court because the court's going to say, hey, listen, this whole thing was governed by this foreign law. Everything happened abroad. The clinic was over there. The doctor was over there. What's your basis for suing here? And so that's definitely an issue for medical tourism.
So dare I say that by keeping it here, perhaps there is some advantage from a patient safety and liability risk management standpoint versus an offshore model?
For sure.
That you're at least covered by the jurisdiction of the United States of America legal system?
Oh, for sure. For sure. No doubt.
So that's fair.
No doubt.
Right. Not to bash other countries, but that's the truth.
If you're an American and you want to be able to use the American court system to address your injury the way that it was designed to work, you want to get treated here. Period.
Okay.
Theoretically, it's not going to be an option for everybody because they have to go abroad because the thing that you want is over there and it's not available here. But for routine maintenance, let's call it, the U.S. is going to be where it's at.
Final question, and then we'll wrap up. Fascinating conversation. What's the good that can come out of this law? We've talked about the controversy. We've talked about the risk, and I don't want to make this all gloom and doom because we've talked about it. There is some good that can come out of it. From your perspective, what's the good that can come out of the law?
It might work.
What might work?
The whole thing. We might find out that for the state of Florida, that these products are a net positive and that people are benefiting from them more than they're not. And people are going to have access to products that they don't have in other states, and people are going to be coming from other states here to get them. And all of a sudden, all of the problems from the last 20 years are going to go away. And maybe, there's an issue with the way that this story has been spun over the last 20 years by the FDA. And it's been, just all doom and gloom because the FDA wants to be able to regulate all these products and on and on and on. Maybe they were wrong. And maybe the products are going to work. And time will tell. It's, like I said in the beginning, I like the fact that we're trying to get better access to products for patients. I think that's admirable. I'm skeptical, but I'm skeptical about any kind of medical procedure. But again, it might work, and we might realize we don't need the FDA to regulate these products, and that there's something that's more advantageous about these products than about Hyalgan. And patients, they don't want to get their bone marrow taken out, and they can just do this, and it's going to provide them with relief for 6 months, and then they go back in another 6 months and they do it again, and everybody's great. That's the good I think that can come out of it. And just to say, I mean, one of the things that you learn when you're talking about the difference between state and federal law is the concept of federalism, right? It's supposed to work that way, and the states are really supposed to be the ones that are experimenting with new concepts, even though it might be different than what the federal government would have to say about it. And that's a good thing overall. That's the way our society is supposed to work.
Yeah.
We don't want to have everything regulated out of Washington, D.C. Sometimes the states have to go their own way. And that's what happened with cannabis as well.
Yeah. And I think to the opposite of what you said, another positive would be that we prove that allogenic therapies don't work better than your own. Either way, whether a donor cells win or your own win, it's a positive because it marches the field forward.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
So that's a potential huge positive here, is the ability to collect comparative data using comparative models to see who wins the race. Something we've never been able to do legally.
Agree.
Yeah? Fair?
Agree. Yeah, very
All
fair.
right. Well, fantastic discussion, and I hope you'll come back in a number of months after we're down this rabbit hole a little bit to follow up with me and talk about how we're doing and how it's going and what you're hearing and seeing in your travels in similar circles with mine. So thank you so much, Andrew, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic conversation, and thanks for your expertise.
Thank you.